Alright, boys and girls, here we are, live, before lock, as the name says. Getting into tonight's 3-game slate. Last night was kind of trash, kind of tripe, kind of not thrilling. Like two guys who I thought were going to be abjectly terrible, specifically Dennis Schroeder and Jamal Murray, and then Jamal Murray went the hell off in the fourth quarter. He was I think it was 0 for 8 from the field going into the fourth quarter, and then in the fourth quarter was 8 for 9 with 20-something points, including a couple free throws and some other stats, and ended up with 36 or 7. Still ranking it as a bad call because I said I liked him more than Kyle Lowry, who obviously got there. I didn't like, in what I still consider to be a bad matchup, Lowry and Kawhi to get there against the Magic, and they did quite easily. So not a terribly good night for me. Some of the stuff went extremely well. One of the things I think of that has gone really well, I think every day of the playoffs actually, as I've looked through the chalk and said, this is the one shitty piece of chalk. And I think I've gotten it right every time. I could be mistaken, but there's obviously Jaylen Brown, who we'll see some more of tonight. There was last night the two guys who were chalky I shit on the most were Danny Green and DJ Augustine. That obviously didn't work out, so that has gone extremely well. But I was a huge fan of Dennis Schroeder last night. Would have been massively exposed myself, and that did not work out by any reasonable terms. So, bad night, bad Eddie. Attempt to do better this evening. As someone just reminded me a minute ago, we're still 100% on over/under calls. I think we're 4-0 last night with the Spurs and the Nuggets picking up at the end enough to pick up the over, which is what we called there. Called the under on the Celtics and the Pacers the first time. Hit that one by 50 points. That should pay you more. Yeah, someone tweet the link at me because the number of frantic people who can't find it is escalating rapidly, and I don't want to perplex my computer by looking for it myself, although I will do so in a minute if we don't come up with it. So the Al Horford situation is interesting. I kind of wish the news didn't come because I was pretty sure he would play. He's generally a tough guy, and obviously I have no inside information or particular ability nor medical talent to, from long distance, discern exactly how rumbly his tumbly is. But I was pretty sure my man was going to suit up and play. We'll talk for a little bit since we do have a plethora of time, lots of time. What to do in the in the eventuality that he decides not to play this evening. But again, I'd give about 8-1, 10-1 right now that he does suit up and does give it a go. Okay, fine, I've gotten the link myself. I am tweeting it. And there it is. I have tweeted it, unless someone probably did it right as I did it. Oh my god, people are going crazy. 8 people. Where's the link? Alright, the link is out. Here, you're going to get a specific reply. Oscar Sanchez. You seem desperate. I don't want you to be sad. Alright, so, yeah, I guess let's get into that. So, let's talk about the hypothetical Al Horford situation is out. Again, this isn't a slate that I look at and think there is a massive amount of edge. So if you are someone who varies your betting, I would take that into account. And the Horford situation is something that could potentially open up some edge to be had there. So let's talk about what we do if Al Horford sits. The quickest way to describe how I would differ from what I would expect the field to do is that if Horford is out, I would increase my exposure to the Pacers well more than I would increase my exposure to the Celtics. For a couple of reasons. Number one, the game would project to be closer. Number two, the Celtics defense would be significantly worse. And number three, I don't think many people on the Celtics benefit significantly. Now, I already like Aaron Baines, regardless. And I'm hoping the ownership stays down, and he was really bad in Game 1, but as I alluded to before Game 1 of the Celtics-Pacers series, he's been very good against the Pacers this season, which I do think is relevant, especially considering the fact that 2 of their games came in, I want to say late March and early April, so I'm not even, it always feels a little weird talking about November games and thinking they mean anything. But I do think there is a significant ceiling for him there. Marcus Smart being out does affect him in general and should lead to more minutes, though we didn't see that Game 1, although his minutes Game 1 were reduced due to foul trouble. As were a couple other guys. There's been a lot of, there's always bad DFS reporting and advice and touting, but there's been just a metric ton today where a couple people enjoy sending me, look what this person said that isn't smart. And there were a number of guys who lost time due to foul trouble, who were reported as, if he's only going to play this many minutes, he was in foul trouble. There was quite a number of them the first time that the 6 teams playing today played, lots of, I like Sterling Brown, but I'm not sure he's going to get the blowout run again. He lost run because of the blowout. So just some interesting there's. Eddie, why is baseball on Osmo still on? Baseball will be up all the way up until lock. All right. You get a tweet too. You get a Biden. So again, in the event that Al Horford is reported as out, I would become significantly more interested in Miles Turner and Domantas Sabonis and Bojan Bogdanovic, who does carry an upside, and Collison. Those guys are the guys I would boost more than any Celtics outside of, Baines himself, who I would expect to see, now 32 minutes or some number like that. I like him anyway right now, where I haven't projected for 25 or 26. That's what he would have gotten the last game. But there was foul trouble. Everybody lost. I want to double check on this, but I'm fairly certain there was a little blowout run at the end of the game. Yeah, we got 4.5 minutes out of Daniel Tice and 2.2 minutes out of Bob Williams. So while in that first game we only saw 33 minutes out of Aaron Baines, I'm double checking my. Okay, someone's saying he wasn't in foul trouble. He had 1 foul only going into the half. He got 2 fouls early in the third quarter. No. He was in foul trouble. Then picked up another foul early in the fourth quarter, came back in, and then left for the blowout. So he ended up with 23 minutes without foul trouble. I suspect that number is around 28. Certainly, I don't think it's crazy to suspect that they'll be a little lighter on Horford's minutes, assuming he's not feeling that great. I don't think that's likely. I think there's probably an 80-90% likelihood he plays, and probably a 50-60% likelihood that he just plays normally, and there's absolutely no difference. There's some chance he has reduced efficiency. There's some chance he has reduced minutes due to not feeling that great. There is some chance he poops himself, as a few players do every year, and runs to the locker room, or gets sick and leaves the game after 7 minutes, as happens, a half dozen times a year. But I don't think you count on any of those things. But if you are rostering Aaron Baines, those are all little cookies that you like to have in your back pocket. And again, we'll take a look at the ownership and see how many people have similar thinking. But again, in the absence of Al Horford, I think a lot of people go Celtics crazy, and I'm generally going to be more happy with the Pacers. Al is a really significant piece of the defense that keeps this team together. Without Al Horford, the defense on this team is going to be significantly easier to get past, and I like guys who have an upside, who are bargain priced, like, again, Collison or Bojan, who I like quite a bit in that eventuality, and Miles Turner. I would be more interested in increasing my exposure to those players than other players. So that's the 2 minutes on what I'm interested in doing in the event Al Horford is out. I expect Al Horford to play. Let me refresh my alerts here and make sure I haven't missed anything toward that end. It appears I have not. So let's talk about this game a little more generally. Someone asked a little while ago, if you had to stack a game, which game would it be? My original answer at that time would probably be this first one. It is actually, let me step back a little bit here. This slate sucks as far as games you want to target. The first and third, the former and latter, those two games are between very, very good defensive teams. And all things are relative, by the way. Those teams would be, have over-unders that are perfectly respectable 5 years ago, and it would have looked great. And tonight we're just, I think, a little bit spoiled because we have multiple 237 over-unders most days of the year that we look at this and go, oh, it's ugly. But those games do not project to have a plethora, a massive amount of fantasy scoring. And then that second game is an obvious blowout concern with a 15-point line. But I think I'm always a bit of a fan of game stacking, or game concentrating is maybe sort of a better way to put on that, as opposed to I have 8 or 9 players to select, let me take the 8 or 9 players I like more. Making sure you're sort of focusing on a game. I'm a much bigger fan of that the fewer games on the slate. I won't go into the inherent reasons why again, but pretty sure that's a mathematical truism. And when it looks this shitty, I think I like it even more. As in, if you pick the one of these games that isn't shitty, and there's a real chance that exactly 2 out of 3 of them are, you're going to look really good, right? I think there is a greater than normal chance that your GPP winning lineup tonight has 6 guys from one of these games than there would be even on your normal 3-game slate, because all 3 of them have obvious paths to being terrible. The first one being they could score 165 goddamn points again. The third one being nobody is really cheap enough yet, and those are 2 excellent defenses. And with the exception of James Harden, the ball tends to be really spread around between all the other players on the court, and just nobody could exceed 35 in a generally slow game between 2 elite offenses. And then the second game could just turn to shit again. So if only 2 of those 3 things happen, you're going to be feeling pretty good. And again, if you focus on the wrong game, you're going to be feeling pretty badly, because then there's a good game and you pick the wrong one. But again, if I'm building a huge amount of lineups tonight, I am devoting more energy, more time, and more exposure to being overly focused on one game for those reasons. And I think that makes sense. I don't know. I'm doing this off the seat of my pants, but I feel good when I say it. So there it is. Let's talk about the visiting Pacers first. This is a terrible matchup for Darren Collison. You are happy to have Marcus Smart out, although it should be pointed out that Collison has been wretched against I don't even know what his average in fantasy points is against the Celtics this year in 5 games now. Yeah, he played all 4 of the previous games. I suspect it's under 20. It's not good. It is a legitimately bad spot. Again, I'll just leave it at that. So, this had someone querying me specifically as to whether or not the absence of Marcus Smart helps. And no, Marcus Smart actually was their primary defender most of the time on Bojan Bogdanovic, which is one of the reasons I, at the start of the series, was more so, and even now, kind of hopeful for Bojan to have his big usage game and take 20 shots, because the matchup is at least marginally easier for him. But the absence of Marcus Smart, obviously by extension, whenever you weaken the defense on a team, everyone benefits at least a little bit, but Collison not being the guy who benefits the most there, it should be Bojan. That being said, it's a 3-game slate. All the games are shit. Darren Collison at $5,000 obviously can have a pretty tepid game, and if he just hits sort of the assist upside, which you see out of either him or Corey Joseph every few games, it's like, oh, they had 13 assists, which they're both very adequate distributors, and that gets you the 20 points, and then they pull together 8 real points, and, 2 rebounds and a steal, and all of a sudden you get 35 out of a guy. So I like Darren Collison by that description. Again, try to correlate games a little bit, but 5,000, the price is now coming down to a point where, I do think he is generally worth the gamble. This is all going to be relative to ownership. No, his minutes are not limited, by the way. Another guy, I think people said, if he's only going to play that many minutes, I don't want to play him. I'm going to confirm it, because I don't want to shit on other people for giving bad information while giving bad information, but I seem to recall foul trouble. 2 fouls in the first quarter, and a foul in the second quarter where he only played 3 minutes, came out and missed the last 3 minutes of the second quarter. So, yeah. And then the blowout, so Darren Collison played a little less than 25 minutes. He would have played about 31. So that should factor into your calculus as well. I don't like Darren Collison, but I really don't like anyone today. So Darren Collison at 5,000. I will take a first peek at our updated ownership. Probably someone... let's just see what the number looks like, and then we'll talk about it for a second. Darren Collison, 6th most owned player on DK, 37% owned. Should be higher on FanDuel. Number 1 on FanDuel, 53%. And that's not crazy. FanDuel, point guard, not the best spot in the world, and $5,000 on FanDuel is relatively significantly more cheap than $4,900 on DK. So those numbers are about appropriate. I'd have no problem meeting them should you choose to exceed them, I can think of far worse things you can do. Wesley Matthews is a good play on FanDuel at 3,800 as a drop at shooting guard. There are a lot of interesting drops at shooting guard. I expect there's a lot of guys who I like on FanDuel who really make my ass burn on DK. One of those would be Wes Matthews. I have him projected for 31 minutes and 19.5 fantasy points. That's obviously not a very optimistic projection, but again, he's a guy who's going to play 30 minutes in an NBA basketball game. That's going to give you some sort of... I actually have him for 32 minutes, pardon me. That carries with it the possibility of some upside. He is a little cheaper than some of the other shooting guard punts. So, Kennard or Collison? Again, one of these difficult for me to put into words how much more I'd rather play Darren Collison than Luke Kennard. Just simply because Kennard is apparently going to be high owned. Because, again, I guess stepping back again, there's important postseason basketball tendencies. But when you get into the game twos of series, it's just not playing guys who happen to have a good game one. I like Luke Kennard. I talked about Luke Kennard a lot during the year. I was shocked and pissed that he was losing time behind Bruce Brown and Stanley Johnson for a while and Langston Galloway. I like Luke Kennard. He's young. I think he has more upside than all those guys, and they should give him more time. That being said, he's not that goddamn good yet, and this matchup isn't a particularly good one. So, much like I said about Jaylen Brown a few days ago and DJ Augustine and Danny Green last night, I would have very little or no Luke Kennard. And if Blake Griffin is in, I would have no Luke Kennard. Like, that just kills it for me. Blake Griffin being in probably has me just saying I'm not going to play a Piston outside of, I guess, some exposure to Andre Drummond. Just because that can go well regardless, and even with Blake in there, I would end up well under what I presume is a healthy projection we have for Luke Kennard. There have been some rumblings that Kennard might start. Very much so like Jaylen Brown. That's not necessarily a good thing. It's almost certainly not a good thing. We have Luke Kennard at 31% owned and eyeballing as, I think, the 12th highest owned player on FanDuel. I would rather play someone else. We have him at 36% owned and the 7th highest player on DK. And I don't think we've missed the chalk fade yet through 5 days or what have you. So, yes, easily Darren Collison over Luke Kennard for me. Though in fairness, Darren Collison, pretty damn chalky himself. Might even be more highly owned than he is once. They're almost identically owned on DK, and you're spending $800 more for Darren Collison. But it's I was gonna say it's a bad matchup for Luke Kennard. It's a bad matchup for the Pistons, obviously. And I would want less of Luke Kennard if he starts. Let me be clear of that. But the type of player, there's only really a couple spots in which players have had success against a good Bucks defense this year. One of them is shooting guards who can bomb some threes. That occasionally has worked out a few times this year. You saw it out of Booker. You saw it out of Clay, had a massive game. So, again, he might tie for the lead in shots for this team. He took 14 in that last game. He made 8 of them. He might shoot 60% from the field again and pick up some peripheral stats, which isn't really his thing, but just... and I think this has borne itself out certainly over the last, week. It's just nice to find the guy who's going to be 40% on and be like, there's a real chance that guy's terrible. I'm just going to hope that happens. And, even if Luke Kennard drops 30, it's not like he's destroyed your evening. But there's a real chance Luke Kennard plays 21 minutes and scores 17 fantasy points, or as we like to call it, pulling a Schroeder. Sorry, had to get that in there. Al Horford available to play. Shocking. So, again, what little edge we might have had there disappears. So, Kennard is the Stoneman on Yahoo. That obviously affects things, especially on a 3-game slate. I still have no issue getting away. I would have to look at Yahoo. I think he might be a small forward there, which is pretty dreadful everywhere. And again, Kennard's positional eligibility on DK obviously helps a lot, but I'll spend $200 more and play Wayne Ellington, who I actually have projected slightly higher and is going to be 1/5 as much owned. But those guys are pretty damn similar to the same player. I'd play Wayne Ellington at 1/6 of the ownership rather than, we've been through it a couple times now. Thad Young got $1,000 boost over Game 1 when was one of, again, before these two teams played in Game 1. I got lucky that it was that shitty, but I spent a while saying I really, really don't like anyone from this game. Made a couple of exceptions for way too cheap Marcus Morris on DK and way too cheap Thad Young on FanDuel, and they were basically the only two players you wanted from that game. which again was abhorrently bad. They've goosed Thad Young, I think, by exactly $1,000 on FanDuel. He's still obviously in play. The ownership will be significant. Nobody's good tonight. You, again, are hoping he picks up... he had 5 or 6 steals, I think, in that first game. And again, before it, I specifically alluded to, he's a guy who can pick up 5 or 6 steals. That happened. That's not likely against the Celtics. He actually lost some time to the blowout and a bit of foul trouble himself, I think. I guess I said it, so I have to go look now. But Thad Young, 1 foul in the first quarter. Second quarter. Looks like only a second personal foul. But came out early. Nope, a third personal foul in the second quarter came out. He lost some time. So, Thad, who played 26 minutes in that game, counting his loss of foul trouble and the blowout, would have played like 32 or 33. So, the Deuce, Thaddeus, my favorite of the 12 apostles. If you want to run Thad out there, you certainly can. With Horford in, I'm less excited about Miles Turner, but he's still cheap, and similar to Thad with the steal upside, he carries the block upside to be able to spike a big game for you. I would actually still rather play Miles Turner than Domantas Sabonis, setting aside ownership. Kojo is still in play for things go weird with Darren Collison. I would rather play Kojo than almost identically priced Tyreke Evans, who would be weird for me to see get 20 minutes. Or much over that. For the Celtics, Horford is in, so not as much as, say, Blake being in, but that kind of screws everything up a little bit. I like Jason Tatum on DK, fills that somewhat shitty small forward position. I'm much happier to play Jaylen Brown today, where, again, isn't going to be super chalk guy. It wasn't like he was a dreadful play, and we just got lucky with him having such a shitty 9 fantasy point game or whatever it was that first game. He's much better on FanDuel, where he's 4,600, which is kind of droppable on a 3-game slate. DK is 5,000, so FanDuel, I'm ambivalent. DK, I still don't like spending $5,000 on Jaylen Brown in a terrible matchup when he moves into the starting lineup, which really dicks his usage. But even though I don't like him, I like him 6 times as much as I did last game, because his ownership is going to be, 20% and not 44 or whatever it was. But I would rather play Jason Tatum. I would rather play Gordon Hayward there. Than him. I like Kyrie quite a bit. He is, just a hair worse for me on this slate than running out Giannis and Harden and things like that. I'm a little more inclined. I haven't spent enough time building today, which usually I put some more time into really tinkering with lineups and seeing what feels good. But my first impression was it's a lot easier to get Kyrie in one of those guys than both of those guys, and it moves you from having to play some shitty value you don't feel great about to being able to make a pretty good lineup with those two guys. And, I only have Kyrie projected for a touch over 40 fantasy points. So, like, points per dollar, he doesn't project as a great guy. Not that anyone really does at their price, but he's saving you $3,500 versus those monster studs on FanDuel and even 23 on DK. So on FanDuel, he ranks pretty close for me. A little bit worse. To take a second to expound on that a little bit more, I have James Harden projected a little bit higher as far as just an amortization of these games playing out 1,000 times. You play these games out 1,000 times apiece because of the significant portion of the time that Detroit just gets housed. I think Harden will score more in general. If you tell me that game stays close and you get 30x whatever the hell minutes out of Giannis, I will have Giannis projected significantly higher. I have him projected for well more per minute than James Harden. So, again, referring to my previous comments about sort of planning a narrative, that should really be your overwhelming factor in choosing between any of these 3 guys, but more specifically between the 2 monster studs. I still like Aaron Baines a lot. I think he is a guy who carries a significant ceiling. The fact that Horford is in makes me actually like him a little bit more as far as being a tournament play versus if Horford had been out. I think it's a point per minute spot for him. I have him projected to play 25, 26 minutes. More than that is possible. I like Aaron still. Terry Rozier on DK, I'd be many lineups in until I got there. FanDuel at $4,000. I like significantly. Brad Stevens, besides heaping some praise on him recently, also said he wanted to play him next to Kyrie a little bit more going forward. He's one of those guys who would pick up a few minutes If Horford had not played alongside Tice, would have moved into the teens in minutes, and Baines would have picked up 8 minutes. And one of the reasons I wouldn't have been that high on the Celtics is it really would have affected like Rozier, Tyson, Baines, and no one else really. But Terry Rozier on FanDuel at $4,000, I like a lot. He's in that tier of guys that are interesting for me because they're droppable alongside Ish Smith and a couple other guys. And Marcus Morris still very much in play for me, 5,100, 4,600. DK would rather play Tatum, would rather play Hayward by a little bit. FanDuel, though, due to the pricing difference between those two sites, I would rather play Marcus of the more I. Let's move on to the second game here. Yeah. So, if Blake plays, I really don't like the Pistons. He himself, I doubt, will be good. He has looked like shit. He is wearing some gigantor knee brace out there warming up. He is just hasn't looked good towards the end of the year. He's not good enough where I think he pays off that price, but he yanks some usage away from everyone else who are already kind of scary plays due to the potential blowout. Now, if you think this game stays close, I like a lot of guys in this game. I really like Reggie Jackson if you think this game stays close. Again, I think he's a great pivot to Darren Collison in many situations. FanDuel, he's $100 more, I think, $200, whatever it is. Same thing on DK. Going to be well less owned. You think this game stays close, you think you get some 30 minutes out of him. I'm excited about that. As it is, I have him only projected for a few points less than Darren Collison. So in a single tournament lineup right now, even with Blake in, I'd have to think about Reggie Jackson versus Darren Collison quite a bit. I would rather play Wayne Ellington than Luke Kennard. I won't go through that whole thing, but I think Kennard might be a Kennard. Just made that up on the spot. Ish, as mentioned, would rather play on FanDuel. The 4,300 is a bit more of a nut than you want to spend. In play at 3,900 on DK, but yeah, this whole game is pretty unthrilling for me. $9,100 Andre Drummond, or even 10-2 on FanDuel. Even if Blake is in, still carries the possibility of being the highest scoring center by 16 or 17 points. So regardless, I do think you keep some ownership there. I think Langston Galloway is probably a bridge too far for me. I do think he is resting behind Ellington and Kennard significantly in the rotation. In play if you're playing, many lineups, but not super excited about it. For the Bucks, again, we've touched on Giannis extensively. That FanDuel price is significant, but small forward is goddamn terrible. Our original ownership projections for FanDuel had like 60% Bojan, who's in a terrible matchup just because there's like 5 playable guys and none of them are priced at a level where you really want to go. Someone says Gordon Hayward, thoughts? I like him more than most of the similar options on DK on FanDuel. That price is a little bit more than I want to spend for him. But again, the position is so bad. I mean, small forward on FanDuel is Giannis, Crowder, Ingles, Bojan, Hayward, Daniel House, Nikola Mirotic, I'm Ron Burgundy. Like, it's bad. So, he's very much in play on FanDuel. I mean, literally on FanDuel, there are 5 guys I don't hate. Giannis, Ingles, Hayward, Bojan, and Crowder. You can play Mirotic. I suppose you can play Tyreek Evans. You can play Daniel House. Yeah, so there's really 8 guys who are even vaguely playable. So the ownership on these guys is going to be really significant. I guess to talk about them in a lump, I slightly prefer Bojan to Gordon Hayward. Giannis is Giannis. Comparing him to these guys who cost half as much is kind of silly. I probably, for saving the money, like Crowder the most for 2 reasons. One, I do think they try something different defensively. He did not get a lot of time in that first game, and they got whooped. And maybe Quinn Snyder decides, hey, let's try to go a little small here, because that sure as hell didn't work first time. I don't really know, but for me, the largest decision there is rather than just throwing away the position. And it should be mentioned, that's not an invalid strategy. I would rather play $4,600 Crowder than $4,300 Mirotic or $4,300 Tyreek or $4,200 Daniel House. Vincent Edwards is on play on FanDuel where you just take your 0. You're just like, I'm dropping it there. is very rarely viable, but on a 3-game slate where no one projects well, and none of those small forwards are like points per dollar relative to other players at other positions, good players. So Royce O'Neal is probably the answer there. So Royce O'Neal actually ends up very much in play for that reason, as he played 15 minutes and scored 5 fantasy points in the first game, but he's at least going to play. So, there's no reason to actually Vincent Edwards. Royce O'Neal would be the choice there, but that's a very reasonable choice. I will go with slightly preferring Jay Crowder for $1,100 more, as I think there's a chance he could have a good game. Obviously, all the guys we've listed here could have a good game, but I'm happy to spend down and pay 4.6 as opposed to 6.4 for people who are in dicey spots. So going back to discussing the game, I like Brook Lopez a lot. This is a very good spot for Brook Lopez. It should be noted, of the 5 starters in Game 1 of the series, everyone by any point per minute description of them was very good. Everyone averaged, I think the worst was like 1.15 fantasy points per minute. Everyone was good. Middleton, Bledsoe, Brown, Giannis, Brolo. And they're all still very much in play for me here, simply because you may get a good game. I almost like to stack this game or just stay the hell away from it. But this is a very good matchup for Eric Bledsoe. It's been very good for him for quite some time. It's still very good. 6,500 on DK is very cheap. I imagine a lot of my lineups would start and begin with the duopoly of either Bledsoe and Harden or Chris Paul and Giannis. I enjoy taking those pieces of those games and those specific pivots off the studs in that way. I imagine I would see those pairings quite a bit. I like Bledsoe. I like him more than Middleton. I like him more than Middleton on FanDuel, where he's $500 more. I like him well more than Middleton on DK, where he's $200 less. I like Sterling Brown a lot. Again, I repeat, he is not correlated with a blowout. He's correlated with not a blowout. But he's just cheap enough that I'm much happier to Sterling Brown than Luke Kennard, for example. I like Brolo quite a bit. I do think there is a big ceiling there. This is a very good spot for him. Due to the trouble with Giannis, there's just any number of ways in which he bangs out ceiling game. We saw ceiling games with him versus Drummond several years in the past. Going back to Nets days, let alone Lakers days. This year he had a 7 for 12 from 3 game against him. I like Brolo quite a bit in tournaments. I like all these starters at their DK prices. As far as how much I want to play them, I'm going to set aside Giannis because it's just combined with too many other things. As far as interest in a tournament, it's going to be Bledsoe, Lopez, Brown, Middleton for me as far as the order I'd like to get him. How about House on DK 3.5K? Yeah, he's the Houston guy that I project of their value coming off the bench. Guy's the one I think most likely to see the time. That was what you got Game 1. I don't really want a Gerald Green. I don't really want a Shumpert. So if you're going to go there, House would be my guy. And I think at that number, it's just fine to go there on DK. I don't love it. There's not a ton of ceiling, but you're not going to be able to build a lineup tonight with plays you like all of, or I'd be surprised. George Hill got extra time because of, wait for it, phone call. That was nicely on cue. George Hill got extra time because of, wait for it, that's right, foul trouble. Eric Bledsoe was in foul trouble at the beginning of that game, I think. We're going to look specifically, but I seem to recall Eric Bledsoe. Foul 4 minutes in, another foul in, came out about 4.5 minutes into that game. Did not touch the court in the fourth quarter, so Bledsoe played 25 minutes. George Hill played 23 minutes. Even in a blowout, that's going to go something closer to 27 to 21 most of the time. So George Hill, obviously, Blake is now a game time decision. Thanks. That changes nothing. So I would expect less minutes out of George Hill, almost certainly. And it's worth keeping in mind that there is the entire third unit situation there with the fact where they have Tim Frazier out there running the point. George Hill did play reasonably significant chunks of the fourth quarter, spelling other guys, but I guess my point is I would project George Hill for 17 or 18 minutes tonight, even in a blowout, not 23 or 24. So I am less excited about George Hill, another player I like a lot, by the way, than other people. Mirotic played 15 minutes in Game 1. I have him for 19 tonight. I think there's a chance you see 23 or 24, and he's a reasonable play on FanDuel, especially where you can drop him at 4,300, not out of play on DK. DK especially, I would rather play Pat Connaughton at his 3,900, but I'm more excited about playing, Sterling Brown than most of those guys because there's a chance of getting 30 whatever the hell minutes. But Mirotic, a hair worse than me. Well, he's not a hair worse than me. He's much better than me at basketball, but a hair worse for me. I'm going to do the last game and then get into all these questions. I see some of them stacking up. Again, our third pretty unexciting game of the evening. Let's talk about the Jazz first, going in against the Rockets. Obviously, that first game did not go the way they would have liked to. This game is much more likely to stay close than the Detroit-Milwaukee game. The Detroit-Milwaukee game blowing out doesn't surprise me at all. This going that badly again really does surprise me. And additionally, I would add the coaches and teams in question here are much more likely to keep their guys in, even in the event of a blowout. And again, we actually have some evidence of this. Both the Detroit game and the Utah game, both those teams got blown up by 30x, I think 35 and 32 in the last game. But you saw the Milwaukee starters playing 23 minutes. And even in that massive blowout, you saw the Utah starters playing, I'll specifically look at it. Utah starters in that blowout. Now, that blowout came on later. It really got out of hand in the third quarter, so that is somewhat relevant here. But even in a 30-point loss in that game, Favors played 24 minutes. That doesn't increase that much, but it increases a few. Rubio played 31, Ingles played 32, Gobert played 33, and Donovan Mitchell played 35. In the Pistons blowout, which was almost exactly the same size, the starters played 12 minutes, but that's Bruce Brown. We don't care about him. 21, 22, 26, and 28. So, for the purpose of blowout concern, I guess I'm just pointing out, we should be less concerned with taking players from this final game, although they are priced not quite as ideally. So for the Jazz, you can obviously Ricky Rubio. It's a bad matchup. What I was going to say was it reminds me a little bit of Kyle Lowry last night, and we saw how that turned out. And the price is even a little better. Now, it's an even worse matchup because Rubio sees a lot of Chris Paul, who is a vastly better defender than, say, DJ Augustine. But, him getting to 40 tonight is not impossible. That DK price is obviously very appealing. I do expect this game to stay close. I like Ricky Rubio a fair amount at 6,500 and 5,700. I like him more than Donovan Mitchell relative to their salaries. I think Donovan Mitchell is just fine in tournaments as a guy who has a very real upside. But it's been a tough spot for him. Again, these two teams played 4 times this year, played 5 games in the postseason last year. We've seen a lot of this. This is not a great Donovan Mitchell spot, but on a 3-game slate, you obviously can have some shares there. I would rather pay his price than pay Joe Ingles' price, setting aside the positionality issues. You can get a lot of guys you like at Donovan Mitchell's positions, not quite so many at Joe Ingles. Favors, FanDuel, don't love it, $7,000. DK at 5,400, I like that quite a bit. The ownership isn't as high as it really could be. I expect him to see probably more time than he saw in that last game. I'd put him at 26 or 27 minutes. I like $5,400 Derek Favors, and again, not a great spot for Rudy Gobert. There's been I've seen a couple people say Clint Capella owns Rudy Gobert. That's an overstatement. It's a below average spot for Rudy Gobert in general. But 7,800 on DK for Rudy Gobert is still a very, very good price. He is a very good play, period. FanDuel, even 9,400, that number is starting to come into range of being a little more tolerable. And Jay Crowder, playable on DK, but same with Royce O'Neal. Shines a little bit on FanDuel if you're going to look at any of these players. No killer Kyle Korver for me. Killer Kyle Korver. 7 points. That's 3 buckets. Sorry. For the Rockets. Yes, I will. Feel free to send in the questions, send in the clowns. Don't worry, they're here. I probably very slightly, and again, it's important. It depends who else I have on the Rockets. Prefer playing Clint Capella on FanDuel or DraftKings to Rudy Gobert. It's very close. You're saving a little money. You're saving $800-900 on Capella, both sites. For that reason, I haven't projected I have Gobert projected a little higher, but not quite enough to justify the extra $800 or $900. But they project very similarly to me. Again, I said at the beginning of the series, you're going to have 37 average out of Capella, 37 average out of Chris Paul in this series, 55 average out of James Harden in this series. You are going to bang out 150 game each out of Chris Paul and Clint Capella. And at their DK prices especially, mostly, I still like them in tournaments quite a bit. I don't want to play Paul and Harden. I have no issue and almost like playing Harden and Capella, and I would consider Paul and Capella sort of uncorrelated. James Harden is James Harden. Not a great matchup for him, but the DK price is obviously too cheap, as are the prices on a lot of these guys. I would, in general, be slightly happier spending up for him than Giannis, but again, I have a lot of, Bledsoe, Harden, or Giannis and Paul I like as those correlations. You can play Eric Gordon, obviously, with everyone in. He's, fourth mouth on offense, but, PJ Tucker is kind of an offensive vacuum, and it can happen, but Game 1 was really about as good as it gets for him. Obviously, much more playable on FanDuel, where he's even dollar per dollar, $300 cheaper. Prices come up a little bit on PJ Tucker, $3,400 PJ Tucker. We never knew how good we had it. Still in play. It's a 3-game slate. He can have a 40-point game. We've seen a couple this year, but do not love. FanDuel would prefer Tucker to Daniel House, probably. DK, I'll take Daniel House. Don't really want any of those other value guys. Going to take 30 seconds, do some tweet deck, Google alert, various other setting checks on things, and then bang out questions for a little while. Glenn Robinson. Nope. No, don't Glenn Robinson. Don't do that. He's just not good. I'd be surprised if he even got to 20 minutes again. But, Glenn Robinson is not consistent enough to be played in cash, and it doesn't have enough upside to be played in tournaments. He's just one of those guys where I just don't, you know what I'm saying? Even if you're on his own team, he is the, at best, third best wing guy to be able to go off there. I'd rather Langston Galloway, at least you can get that game out of. For fun, let's game log Glenn Robinson III and see, certainly with everybody in, has he had a playable fantasy game this year? Let's look through the whole year. Against the Knicks, with a lot of guys sitting, got 32 minutes and had 28 fantasy points. That's almost doable. Let's go back 5 months, and he had 24 one day against Miami, where he played 30 and a half minutes in that game. So, yeah, he is a dreadful fantasy player. Off the top of my head, I would guess he averages 0.55 fantasy points per minute or something. It's bad. He has exceeded 20 fantasy points twice this year, and they were both in games in which he saw way the hell more minutes than he would possibly see in this game. So, no, he's in that Bruce Brown. There's nothing there for cash. There's nothing there for tournaments for me. But that was fun for today's version of TJ Leaf. We got to do that one. You like Rjax or Collison better? Collison a little bit in cash, Rjax in tournaments for me at the moment. Paying up for Harden and Greek on DK, I think that's fine. I'm largely ambivalent on it. It makes sure other guys, you're really hoping they get there. But obviously, it's difficult for me to answer that because Harden is going to score between 48 and 82 fantasy points, and Giannis is going to score between 50 and 88 fantasy points. If they both hit the upper end there, that lineup is obviously the nuts. More likely than not, it's fine. You know what I'm saying? If they score about what we expect, which is, let's say, 120 combined, I'm pretty ambivalent about that versus having the extra money and turning one of them into Kyrie or Donovan Mitchell or Clint Capella or Chris Paul or etc. So I don't have a strong take on doing it. I think it's fine to do it. I don't think it's any kind of mistake, but it's not one of those days where I'm like, yeah, let's do it. It's kind of a double center evening for me on DK. I like Capella. I like Gobert. I like Brolo. There's enough guys where I imagine I would be doing that reasonably frequently. I like Aaron Baines. Thanks. Do I want to go back to Tucker? No, not really. The man in his dream. The price has come up a little bit more. And again, it's the Jazz. Now, like, everyone here, with the exception of the second game, kind of has a bad defensive matchup, but you're asking a lot for, PJ Tucker against the Jazz to bang out 35 for you. If playing one FanDuel lineup, force in Harden, Giannis, or just one? I built one cash lineup, which did end up with both of them. The one tournament lineup I built only had one. So that's the practical example. Connaughton thoughts. I think he's fine. Correlates with the blowout more than anything else. So I'm fine going there instead of, say, Sterling Brown if you have no exposure to Giannis or Drummond. Otherwise, I'd rather play Sterling Brown, for example. How about House on DK? We already did that. Do you prefer Rozier or George Hill as a fan Hill drop? I prefer Rozier by quite a bit. Rubio or Mitchell? I'll go with Rubio. Seems like Snyder prefers pick and roll from Rubio and Gobert over Mitchell, sucking up usage DK. Yes, but again, it's worth pointing out they got demolished in the first game, so some changes could be coming. And Quinn Snyder is a guy who changes it up and tries shit. Like, he tried some shit last game. It did not work, but they ran some very unique defensive looks out there. Is it crazy to fade Harden at 45% ownership? No. It would be crazier to fade him at like 20%. Like, the more owned he gets, there's more incentive to fade him. Like, he's playing the Jazz. James Harden gonna have 46 fantasy points against the Jazz, and Giannis gonna have 68 fantasy points against the Pistons, and you're gonna feel good. So no, Harden is by no means a must play. Turner or Brook on DK GPP? Yeah, the other person. No, that's okay. We're good there. That's fine. I will, with Horford, and prefer Brook Lopez. Can you repeat which site you like Tatum more on? DK, significantly. In one FanDuel lineup, would you fade Giannis or Beard if you could have only one? Let me think whether or not the decision I made there was instructive of anything. I would probably be more inclined to fade James Harden because of the fact that there are simply more shooting guard options that I think are okay to decent. Barely, by the way. But there's a couple more. I am not upset with any lineup that I see Wesley Matthews in, or Luke Kennard. Again, the ownership is higher than I want to see, but we saw he can have a good game. I don't really want to go there, but he's very much in play at $4,100. He's better than $4,200 Daniel House if you're fading Antetokounmpo, for example. Ellington, I'm fine with. $4,500 Eric Gordon, I'm fine with. $4,500 Sterling Brown, I legitimately like. $4,600 Jaylen Brown, I kind of like. Pat Connaughton is in play. Chris Middleton is in play. Donovan Mitchell's in play. So, small forward, there's like 5 guys I'm kind of okay to play with. If you have Giannis out of there, I got to pick 2 of them. Shooting guard, that's closer to 8 or 9. So, I suppose for that reason, really, and that reason alone, I'm a little more comfortable letting go of James Harden on FanDuel. But, meh. Top FanDuel center, keep landing on Drummond, but I hate it. Yeah. There's a real chance my answer to that question is Aaron Baines. Following the same theory of Jay Crowder or Royce O'Neal, if a position isn't good, spend as little as possible. It's not going to be Aaron Baines for me. I mean, my top overall centers are probably the mid-range guys. I would probably rather play Brook Lopez as most, then Miles Turner. It's probably Lopez, Turner, Cabella, Gobert, Baines, Drummond in that order, I think is where I would land on centers. But, I'm amortizing there my somewhat irrational like for Aaron Baines in this situation. There is some risk there, but, I'm happy with those mid-range guys. I do think there are big ceilings potentially there for Lopez and Turner, so I would rather spend $6K on those guys in a tournament with the shot of randomly banging 50 than Aaron Baines, who, I think gives me 25, but pretty unlikely to give me a tournament size number there. But anyone going back to Jaylen Brown tonight? A lot of people will. I never left him, someone said. We do not mind Drummond guarding Giannis. That's one of the adjustments we can make. Yeah, well, Thon McCurr, I leading into that game, among the other things I said was Thon McCurr, I expect to have 2 fouls in 2 minutes. I think he got 2 fouls in about 75 seconds. Thoughts on Baines on DK? I like him a lot. If playing Giannis, can you play Ish and Reggie together? On FanDuel, I'm fine playing Ish and Reggie. On DK, you're probably asking for trouble. FanDuel, it's fine because you can really throw either of them in the trash on a slate of the size. Thoughts on PJ Tucker going for 25 again? I don't think it's likely. It could happen. I have projected for about 20 fantasy points. Who do you have for higher ceiling, Pat Connaughton or House? I would have Connaughton for a higher ceiling. You get a blowout, you hope to get 24 minutes. Probably not that much, but 20 minutes. And just the ceiling's a little better. House it can get there. We've had a couple sort of housey ceiling games. But I think that game's more likely to blow out, and the reserve's more likely to get more time, even if they blow out equally, as we previously demonstrated. DKGPP 4,700 left for utility best play. I want to say Terry Rozier. It's not, but I want to say Terry Rozier. I have an irrational appeal for some of the Celtics. It's Marcus Morris. That's pretty easy. If you don't have Marcus Morris, it's going to be Marcus Morris there. Don't mind Crowder. You can do Mirotic. Like Sterling Brown, but I will take Marcus Morris there. Mark Fastins. Bojan or Tatum? I'll take Tatum on DK. Collison or Morris? I don't know. Let's look at ownership again. See if we've gotten an update or anything. Talk about some of these guys versus their ownership. All right. On DraftKings right now, we have number 1, James Harden at 46%. Yep, hard for me to argue with that. That's about where that should be. Number 2, Clint Capella at 7,000. With that relative to the other center prices, I would come in under that number. We have 42% Clint Capella now. Again, I have him ranked very similarly to Gobert, who we have at 27. Drummond is $2,000 more, but we have him at 26. We have Miles Turner at 20. I don't know where Brolo is. We have Brolo at 10, so I much prefer Brolo there. So I would come in under on that Capella number for those reasons. We have Horford at 39. I'm going to suspect that is high due to the consternation about his tum-tum, but I'd be a little bit under that. Tatum at 37, I think I'd be under that, although I do like his just projection at 5,600 on DK. Collison at 37, I'd be under that, though I guess you can't really be under on everyone. Giannis 35, Rubio 35, Irving 35, Kennard 35. Yep, there it is again. Today's Danny Green, and actually not dissimilar fantasy basketball players, although Danny Green's a hell of a lot better defender, will be played by Luke Kennard. I don't want 35% on Luke Kennard. And I hope he starts, because his ownership will go up and his production will go down. So here's hoping Luke Kennard gets the start instead of Bruce Brown's ceremonial bullshit. Okay, no real relevant thing there. Let's get back to some questions. If Blake plays, what do you think ownership will be on DK? 6%, 8%, and I still wouldn't want it. Can you elaborate on Aaron Baines? You liked him last game. It wasn't good. That's fair. It wasn't good. What is it you like in the matchup? He's done very well in the matchup. It's a decent rebounding spot for him. He gets to start at the 5, and he lost time due to foul trouble and the blowout last game, so he's I'm a much bigger fan of playing 4K big guy value than shooting guard value. And a lot of the 4K value is shooting guards, and they don't tend to get assists, and they don't tend to get any rebounds, and just the floor is perilously low. Like the game from Baines last time was bad. He ended up with, he had 4 points and 9 rebounds and a block or something, was about the line he put up, and had like 16 fantasy points. And that was about as bad as it's going to get. Langston Galloway and Luke Kennard and those guys can give you 7. And I believe Aaron Baines had his 2 highest minute totals and his 2 highest fantasy point totals against the Pacers this year. So, it can happen, and just the ownership isn't that high. So, I'm not like, yes, I love Aaron Baines so much. I think it's just a smash spot for him. It's an okay spot for him. It's just ownership, and it feels safer, and I think the upside is pretty similar. So, I don't love Aaron Baines, just relative to the other options. I would rather play Aaron Baines. Can you have a lineup with Howard and Paul in them and DK GPPs or no? Yes, you absolutely can do that. We had games this year against the Jazz where that happened. You can get 45 out of Chris Paul and 71 out of James Harden. Run it back with some Jazz at that point, because you are, stacking that game then. So play Gobert or play Donovan Mitchell or get some Jazz in there. Would be the best correlation. PJ Tucker thoughts on the very fringe of playable in tournaments. Collison or Morris? We did that. Collison. Fade Giannis and Harden. Good or bad idea on FanDuel? I would not do it in one lineup. It seems unlikely to be neither of them get there. Could that lineup work out? Sure. Obviously, there's a world in which both those guys score 40-something and your more balanced lineup, not having to play shitty value, gets there. I think if you run the slate out 1,000 times, running neither of them would not be the most profitable strategy. One or two would more likely be the case. Kojo or Rozier on FanDuel, that's really close for me. Kojo, certainly if you're running Kyrie Irving. If your other point guard isn't Kyrie Irving, that's really close for me, whichever way you end up correlated game. Thad or Sabonis on FanDuel? For the ownership, I'd probably Sabonis at this point. Can you rank the Boston forwards on DK? So I'm talking about Morris, Hayward, Brown. I feel like I'm missing one. But I will go with Morris, Hayward, Brown. Can you play Rozier and Kyrie on FanDuel? Yes, you can. It feels weird, but he's 4K and you can throw him away. Morris or Gordon? Again, that's going to come down to ownership for me. Right now, we have Marcus Morris at 34%, and we have Gordon Hayward at 16%. So at that point, certainly Gordon Hayward, especially if the money doesn't make any difference for you. But we're looking at half the ownership there. I didn't mention Ersan Ilyasova, I think, is pretty decent on both sides at 3,500, where the minimum on FanDuel and can be thrown away. 3,100 on DK, pretty damn close to the minimum. Should get his 20 minutes either way, regardless of what else happens in this matchup. So yeah, we are down to a minute, so I'm going into full looking at shit mode. You're right, I did not give a sports betting take. The DK $400,000 tournament is going to rake only 4% or so. I don't know if it makes a good idea to throw in a pile of entries, but it normally rakes 15-16%. Right now it's 42,500 entries out of 47K. So right now it's ranking, raking like 6% actually, but it's going to rake half its normal rake or something. So that could very possibly be of appeal to someone. So some news that DK main event is going to not rake enough. Their for $22,000 zone is basically going to rake 0. There's just some overlay on DK today. Some events, significant ones, are not filling. So yeah, some interest. Yeah, let's take a look at FanDuel. I think that's a decent idea. Never mind. Contest started right as I was looking. So, let us look at some ownership. Clicking through on FanDuel first. Let's find out they had a $350,000 tournament today, which also did not fill. Had 37,618 entries at $9.99, so that means it took in somewhere around $375,000. So that's like 7% rake. So overlay both sites, guys. So I hope you got some. Some numbers. Kyrie, 47% on FanDuel. Wes Matthews at 10. I like that. Marcus Morris, 45. Not surprising. Aaron Baines, 10. That feels pretty good. Darren Collison, 30. So less than we expected. Bojan, 29. Gordon Hayward, 21. Jason Tatum, 20. Marcus Morris, as previously mentioned, 45. Miles Turner, 20. Jaylen Brown, 20. Again, still don't love him. I'd like a little less than that. So I'd still be under that number, but it's much more tolerable than the 40 whatever last time in a terrible spot. 24. Domantas Sabonis. Yeah, so there's some numbers. Looking at DraftKings. Looking for, what do we got? 400K, which again didn't fill, so a little bit of ownership there. Blake Griffin listed inactive about 4 seconds before lock. Pretty amusing. So if you have Pistons, feel a little bit better about them. That's really what that's going to come down to here. On DK, let's download the thingamabob. All right, Marcus Morris, 40.5%. I would want less than that. Certainly not a bad play, but that's a big number for a guy in a tough matchup. Again, hashtag analysis. Kyrie, 35. Yeah, I mean, he's priced really well. That's not unreasonable. Tatum, 26. Again, priced really well, not unreasonable. Collison, 24. Yeah, about where it should be. Bojan, 22. Sure. Al Horford, 20. Would want, I think, a little more than that. Just, the multi-positional eligibility in the space. But, yeah. Gordon Hayward, 19. Okay. Miles Turner, 12.6. Again, that's about right. Thad Young, 12.4. It's about right. Sabonis, 10. It's about right. Baines, 8. I would want more than that, obviously. Jaylen Brown, 7. Again, the price not ideal, but that's probably an overcorrection by the field. I don't think I'd go quite that low. Wesley Matthews, 5. Beyond DK, that's more than I'd want. Tyreek, 3. Rozier, 2. And again, DK, that price not so good. Kojo, 2. More than 2 Kojo. Doug McDermott, I don't know if you've heard this. Never the answer, 0.5. Daniel Tice, 0.2. RJ Hunter, 0.16. TJ Leaf, 0.09. Rarely, but occasionally the answer. Aaron Holiday, 0.08. Alize Johnson, step off the bus with the Alize, 0.05. Kyle O'Quinn, 0.05. Semi Ojale, really never the answer, 0.03. PJ Dozier, 0.03. Jonathan Gibson, 0.02. Bob Williams, 0.01. Devon Reed, 0.01. Marcus Smart, 0.01. Congratulations, you played yourself. Also, shout out to Victor Oladipo, 0.00, but someone bought a share. It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it works out for him. I will be back again tomorrow. I should have taken Monday off. I thought that there would be multiple 2-game days. There are not. There are just Mondays. There were 2 games this Monday, and then like 3-3, 3-4, 3-3, 4-4. Next Monday, 3-4, 3-3, 4-4. So obviously those numbers will be paired off a little bit as we get into the postseason and teams get eliminated. Although we've had the one nice thing about, Orlando grabbing a game in Toronto and the Clippers grabbing a game, more DFS. Root for underdogs. You want 7-game series. More DFS, more money. Thon on DK. Yeah, I mean, obviously not out of play. I again, worry about foul trouble, although I think, they will start with Drummond there, I think. Maybe just for the get-go, which is good for Bolo again. But, yeah. With the Griffin news, thoughts on DK guard, Ish, Ellington, or Kennard? For raw points, I have to take Luke Kennard. For a tournament, I would rather play either of the other 2 guys, probably Ellington for the direct correlation. So in cash, I'd probably play Luke Kennard. I'd have him projected highest by 1.5 or something. In tournaments, I would rather play Wayne Ellington. Love that Griffin news right after lock. Yeah, it doesn't change a lot. Like, it would have made the other Detroit... Like, Blake was not playable. It's good for your Drummond shares. That's really the most significant piece of news. And it opens up Ellington and Kennard. Like, Blake being in there just... and I guess it makes Thon playable, etc. But... it really wasn't that big of news. But yeah, I assumed he was out. And if he had played, how many minutes was he going to play? So I don't think it was that significant news. But there it is. We are donezo, my friends. Ooh, I just saw a picture of my hair. It is feathered and it is lethal today. Look at that. It's going up like a shelf. It looks like a subduction plate. It's getting sucked under the left side of my head. I will be back again tomorrow and Friday, where it's 7 p.m. again, I know for sure, on Friday. And a few games. So, better luck tonight. Hopefully I don't screw the pooch as hard on anyone as I did on Dennis Schroeder last night. Sorry for not putting out a betting line. But again, I really don't like to force shit when it doesn't come organically. And I didn't look at any of these lines as particularly unreasonable. And I got to keep my perfect record intact. So maybe tomorrow. We'll see how it goes. With that, bon chance, mes amis. Until tomorrow.